Okay, very special guest today on the ITC. It's not just the impeccable name pronunciation, not just the ability to effortlessly rise to the occasion when the moment calls for it, or the sick accent. This dude right here brings it. One of the voices of the UEFA Women's Champions League, football commentator extraordinaire, Mr. Cam Pope. We appreciate you hanging out with us, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on. That's quite an intro. I've got to try and live up to it now. You're going to make me blush, but no, thank you guys. Thank you for getting in touch with me. And I love talking about this job, and I love the UEFA Women's Champions League. It's been a brilliant tournament. I'm on my second season of it now, and yeah, this one in particular, I think has been great fun. I think that there was maybe some worry at the start of the tournament as to whether we just see the big sides cruising through, but as this week has told us in Matchday 6, you can never predict what's going to happen, and to be that person who has the responsibility of calling it is a privilege I don't think I will ever get used to.
Yeah, it's been tremendous fun watching. Speaking of some surprises, so you had a match yesterday. Group A, sewn up coming into this one. Barcelona, your winners of Group A, defending champs. Benfica, your runners-up, so those two slots are locked in. A lack of stakes can sometimes make for sometimes an uneventful match, but that isn't what we got. This Benfica side celebrating their first ever trip to the knockout stage, Matchday 6 on their home turf. And it isn't every week that Barcelona comes to town. We like to call these on the ITC absolute bangers, and that's what we got. You had the call, Benfica 4, Barcelona 4. What are you going to remember about this one?
Honestly, it's a bit of a blur. I mean, I felt that sometimes you go through a channel of kind of dull games as a commentator. You always want to be on the big game. You always want to be on the exciting game. But I knew when I had a 0-0 last week. These games start to blur, but I believe it was Slavia and St. Pölten, and that was 0-0. Yeah, and then I had the Barcelona game against Eintracht Frankfurt, and there were only 2 goals in that one. And when Barcelona are scoring only 2 goals, you're in a bit of a dry patch. And so getting that game last night was just incredible. I mean, I feared for Benfica at 2-0. So I get an array of games. I cover all sorts of games over the Champions League, and you tend to find out in advance. And this year, I'll rewind a little bit so people get a bit of context. But we found out from our coordinator our games for the first 4 match days, so the ones that were in 2023, and then we got after the 4th match day we got our next games for match days 5 and 6. They were sort of working out what the big games were going to be, and so I was really happy when I got this one. I thought I imagined that Benfica would need to get a result from it, and then obviously things transpired otherwise, and not only were they already confirmed us through, but we already knew that Barcelona were top in the group and that Benfica were coming second. So there really was essentially nothing to play for. And so you can sometimes look at these games and you can think, well, this is going to be a bit flat, maybe a bit empty, but it was anything but. And so it's a massive warning to commentators, to fans, that you can never predict what's going to happen. And sometimes the games you think are going to be absolute bangers, as you say, fall a bit flat, but this one just seemed to grow. And the moments, to answer your question, the moments that stick out, I mean, the ends of each half are incredible. I mean, Marielle do maybe not a name that too many fans knew across the European scene before this week, but everyone knows her name now. I thought she was a shoo-in for a hat-trick when they left her on in the second half, and it was quite the performance, but it was about more players than just that. Jessica Silva, brilliant hand in her first goal, and then did really well for the third as well. I thought that Nicole Reisler played really well before she came off, and Benfica, they earned it. They didn't just limp through that group. They've shown that they can mix up with the best, like Roma showed us last year. And I think neutrals might have been disappointed that Barcelona got back into it, but then there was another storyline to it. Barcelona, you can never knock them down, and it was a nice sort of character arc for Lucy Bronze to unfortunately be the one who had to try and clear off a line, and she wasn't able to do that. And then to save her team at the end. And I saw a few Barcelona fans complaining that maybe it's not that big a deal. We had a weak team out, but this is a team that doesn't lose games, and they were on the cusp of quite an embarrassing defeat, because they started, okay, you could say that they've got plenty of defenders out, and that is tough, but still a very, very good squad. And Benfica gave them a real scare. So that last 15 minutes goes down as one of my favourite quarters of an hour I think I've ever called in football.
I believe it. I mean, you look at it from Benfica's side, it's 2 equalizers and then the go-ahead late in like the 81st minute there on the Bronze own goal. If you're a Benfica fan, What do you take from that? I mean, even if Barcelona fans are claiming that they put out a weak side, what really is a weak side from Barcelona? But if you're on the Benfica supporter side, are you marching into the knockout stages like, look at us, like we can really compete here?
I think they've got to fancy themselves now, and I'm really excited for the draw on Tuesday and seeing who they get, because obviously they can't get Barcelona, that much we know, because you can't get teams from the same group. But then, yeah, you're looking at Lyon, and you're thinking, all right, not infallible. They dropped points twice in the group stage. I've done a lot of them in DAZN because I do Liga FA and DAZN also for DAZN. They look a strong side, but we've now seen that both those teams are human, and they'll think, well, if we did it against Barcelona, why can't we do that against Lyon? Then you're looking at, okay, it's going to be a tricky one coming up against Chelsea, but the way that Paris Saint-Germain looked, yeah, maybe that's the one that they want, because it was a crazy finish to Group C, wasn't it? So it's Ajax and then Paris Saint-Germain, right, because of the head-to-head, and I think they really fancy themselves in that. Because it's going to be a really interesting now to see if they can carry on from it. So yeah, I think that Benfica fans can take a lot of confidence out of that. I don't think they have to fear anybody going into the last day, and I think conversely, other teams might have thought, well, I don't think we fancy Benfica right now, having seen that they scored 4 goals against Barcelona. So it's been a really nice setup at the end of the group stage.
Absolutely. On the flip side of that, you mentioned like Barca fans might be saying, oh, we had a weaker side out there. I believe the stat that's floating around here, it's their first match that they didn't win in 23 matches across all comps. Is it that easy to blow it off and say, we didn't have our best team out there?
I think it was a shock. I think it was a shock even that they were in the game for so long, because, they've not lost since before the Champions League final. They had a little rough patch when they were preparing. They dropped points against, was it Sevilla or Valencia in the league? I forget now. And then Madrid Club de Football Femenino when they lost. And then they've gone on this mad winning streak. And so, yeah, I think it is hard to brush off, because I think it's been threatened a couple of times. Eintracht Frankfurt on another day, they have chances. If Laura Prashnikar scores her chance at, I think it was 0-0 at the time, it's a very, very different game. And okay, they've come off a swashbuckling win against Levante, and nobody can question it. When a big game comes up, Barcelona turn it on. I think their danger is maybe complacency in the games where you're not expecting much from your opposition. I sort of expect them to beat Real Madrid every time, to beat Levante every time, Atleti. But, if they come up against a side like Häcken, they could have trouble in a first leg. However, don't get me wrong, I don't think we're going to see this lead into a massive downturn from Barcelona. And I still think that it takes a brave person to bet against them winning all 4 competitions.
Such a big difference between, a domestic league season where 1 result, 2 results, or a half of football here, half of football there, it can't quite sink you the way that a knockout stage can. So to that point, a tricky result the first time, maybe going to Gothenburg to play a Häcken, and maybe it's a 0-0, and now it gets real nervy really quick. And I think on the Benfica point, they lost 5-0 match day 1 to that same Barcelona side. So I kind of feel like we've seen them grow up a little bit through this tournament. Also no Kika Nazareth the last 2 matches. Jessica Silva the match before. She had a great sort of coming out party, because I think that was her first big splash of the group stage. Just looks like a different ball club.
They do. They have grown, and I think they are I think they're maybe the dark horses for an upset. And again, it does depend who they go. In fact, yeah, I got it wrong. It's PSG who are seeded, so they are a possible opponent. And I think that's the one that they want. Because they've shown themselves to be human in DAZN. Chelsea I put in that middle ground between OL and Barcelona, but they can look back at the way they've grown over that group stage, and especially from the year before as well, because we can't forget they lost 9-0 to Barcelona. And they've really turned it on. And they lost Chloe Lacasse as well, but they've replaced her, Marielle Du. She scored as many goals as Carolina Graham Hansen, I think, in all competitions this season. I think, yeah, they've really grown as a side. Lucia Alves, I was really impressed with. I think they missed her against Horsengård the week before from the yellow cards, because she does throw herself into a challenge. There's no debate in that. But they're a really exciting team to watch, and I think you're absolutely right, Dino. Knockout football is a different beast. We've seen how exciting group stages can be. The tension and one wrong move can set the tone for the whole of the 180 minutes. And so, there is an advantage to being seeded. Of course there is, and having that advantage going into the second leg. But you have to hit the ground running. And I think that we have to talk about Häcken too. who have been playing all of this in like their pre-season, haven't they? I think that's just incredible. The fact that they've had a really horrible end to the season where they lost out by, I think it was 1 goal differential. They lost out in the Damallsvenskan to Hammarby. And they picked themselves up. They lost a couple of players and they're going, right, we're going again. Because I did Beko Häcken's game the day before against Real Madrid, which was which was not as eventful. And I think if they can hold on to Rosa Kafaji, because she's another one who's going to be on the list now for a lot of big clubs, isn't she? What a player. If they can hold on to her, they've got a player called Matilda Nildane, if I'm not mistaken, who is a teenager from AIK Stockholm, who scored 23 goals in 25 games or something ridiculous. So they're going to have all these players coming back in. Ellen Rubinson is with them as well, having been injured for so long. They've got Anna Cheeky come back after over a year. If they can, they're having a little break now, but they'll be building up towards the start of their season. I think they'll have already started the Swedish Cup. And so, we can't write them off as well. So I don't think there's an easy draw. Look how good Brann have been. I've not had the pleasure of watching them yet, but, they were like the smallest coefficient in round 2. It was at Glasgow City that they beat, and it's just they have nothing to fear going into these games, and so we could definitely see those 4-seeded teams going through and say no more about it. But I think there's going to be at least over the all the legs that will be played. I think there's going to be one shock at least.
So this is the part of the program we have to disclose, Cam. This is an extremely pro Brann podcast. Senior Gopset, Raquel Engesvik, just Aurora Mikkelsen, everybody across the board. We love this squad. We have a ton of viewers from Norway who have been just amazing. Like the Brann Battalion is like way behind the show, and it's just because we totally bought into them. Love that club.
That's brilliant. I mean, you always want a variety of clubs to follow, and it just so happens that I've not done Brann yet, and I would love the chance to take over one of their games, and we'll just have to see how it pans out. But what a story it is. I mean, nobody gave him a chance. No one gave him a prayer, and the way they've come on, and they didn't seem to run out of steam either. It wasn't like Häcken, who maybe started well and then looked like they had a little bit of a fade in the middle, and you wondered. And they've got every right to be there, and I think it's great for the women's game because we had a lot of talk in. I'm based in England. I live in Manchester, and there was a lot of people, a lot of WSL fans who were unhappy to only have Chelsea going through. Arsenal dumped out by Paris FC. Manchester United weren't happy to draw PSG. Okay, a side who've now got to the last 8 again. But I think this just goes to show that there shouldn't be this almost divine right of clubs from the big leagues to go straight waltzing through to the competition. I know the format is going to change in a couple of years, but I think it's really important because look, we've got a team from Norway, we've got a team from Sweden, we've got a team from Portugal and the Netherlands. These aren't the big leagues across Europe, and they've still done enough to get there. So no, I think it's really good that it's panned out that way. And so, any Norwegians listening, I mean, I hope I haven't murdered the pronunciation of your favourite club. But yeah, we will see. If I do get them in the quarterfinal, trust me, I'll be tapping up every Norwegian I know to help me out with those names. But good luck to them and good luck to everyone because it's been a great tournament.
Special shout out to you also for pronunciation. I know we get a lot of help from you, just hearing how you are pronouncing some of these names because some of them are tricky to find. You mentioned dark horses early. I think we've identified a few at least, Benfica, this Häcken side, and Brann. Anyone in particular that you think, and it sounds like you think PSG might be the most gettable of those winners. Any matchup or any kind of like Cinderella story that you think you might be looking at?
I think it's hard to say. And as a commentator, I want to be conscious of not putting a narrative on a game. You can't. I don't think you can search for one. So we spoke before we went on air, guys, didn't we, about Clive Tildesley? I know that he's quite iconic in the States. He's iconic here too, and quite rightly. Man's a legend. And I've spoken to him a few times actually for advice, for tips, for feedback, and something that he and others have passed on too. I spoke to some brilliant radio commentators, and they said that you are a journalist first and foremost, and so as a fan, we love to predict, don't we? We love to say, oh, wouldn't it be great if one of these small teams got through to the last 4? But I'm always wary of dressing it up too much in advance because it might well be that all 4 teams get beat 8-0 in the first leg, and I have to be true to that. But on the pronunciations, actually, well, firstly, thank you very much. But I feel quite strongly about this because I had an unusual route into broadcasting, and I did a modern languages degree, and so I was always very, very big on languages. So I had a bit of help with the kind of Spanish and French names, but Whilst it's nice when people recognise that you're pronouncing names right, and it is really nice to see on social media when people commend you, and also people have pulled me up as well and made me refine certain ones. I keep getting Jackie Groenen wrong. I'm very sorry to any Dutch listeners who had to hear me say Jackie Groenen. I honestly think it's the bare minimum for commentators, and I think as broadcasters, not just commentators, all broadcasters, it's our responsibility because these players have earned their way, and a lot of them fought through adversity to be at the top of the game. And the very least we can do is pay respect by getting their names right. So thank you, but it's I think that football in particular has a long way to go before we meet the standards, but it's getting there.
I'm glad you brought that up because when we were watching the World Cup this past summer, it was pretty clear that the coverage that we at least got in the US was, not quite dismissive, but didn't quite meet the level of what we were watching. There was a lot of, girls are just going out there giving it their all. And I'm like, we kind of also recognize there's just a real gap here with regard to talking about this sport in a way that really just treats it like a sport, where you're just watching the best of the best. And the storylines are incredibly captivating and there's so much there. And we've had trouble also, Grant, you mentioned this, like looking up injury news and, it's just kind of hard to find information. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to go on this journey, which has been really rewarding thus far.
Well, good on you guys because, it is hard to find information at times in the women's game because I commentate on men's football as well. And there's just an abundance of material out there. So when I first came into covering the women's game, and this is about 18 months ago now, and I was very lucky actually. It was a big break for me because I'd done radio football for a couple of years. I really wanted to break into telly as well and do the two strands. And I commentate on tennis too, and so I'd done tennis on the TV, but I was still trying and failing to get into TV football. And it just so happened that DAZN, one of the companies I work for, they acquired the summer that England won the Women's Euros. They acquired the rights to Liga F. And I randomly got a call from a producer. He said that, look, the season starts next week. We've acquired the rights for Liga F. We're going to do 3 matches a weekend. We need a commentator who is based near the studio. And he just heard from a colleague that they had this guy called Cam who did tennis, who lived nearby. And he said, do you know about football? I was like, yeah. And he was like, look, it's going to be pretty hard to get, it's going to be quite hard to get information on this league, I imagine. And he's not wrong. It's hard to get information on the WSL at times in England. So getting information on the Spanish league is difficult. He said, so, we'll give you a try and just see if it works out. And I just said, well, I have a Spanish degree. And he went, really? Oh, you're in. It was like, oh, great. So it threw me in at the deep end. And, wow. And I did probably a woeful commentary. It was like, I think it was Atletico de Madrid against Sporting de Huelva. And it was 3-0. And I limped through it. But doing my best to try and piece together this jigsaw, this puzzle of facts that were so hard to get. And so, but when you do dig, it's really rewarding because you do find that information is out there. You just have to work. And so guys like you doing this podcast and anyone who's trying to share the women's game, I think is playing a part in the growth of it now, because I'd watched a bit of women's football before. I always followed the Lionesses. I'd seen the WSL on TV. I'm now a full convert, and I have been for 18 months because I was like, right, this is my into the industry, and women's football has given me this, and so I'm going to give it back. I want to, whatever league I do, I want to do this to the very best of my ability, and I want to, bring it up. I want to enhance the experience for the viewers. Like I did the first game they televised, and that was a massive privilege. And so, yeah, I think it is really important that we give it the respect that it deserves. And sometimes commentators have asked, like, do you commentate on women's football differently to men's? And I think it's important that we don't, by and large. But I am, and especially as well as a man, as a cis man, I try to make sure that I look out for anything that might come across as condescending or maybe inadvertently offensive, because most of the time when commentators do things that people don't like, it's not intentional. And so sometimes, I wouldn't talk ill of any colleagues, but sometimes the standard, like in any job, does fall short of what might be expected, but that can sometimes be from an off day and sometimes it's just a difficult game, and it puts you down an avenue and you get a bit stuck. But I think, sometimes we have to remember that this is an elite game, and that we can't lose sight of that. It has to be given the same amount of respect, and players have to be talked about like athletes, and so I think it is changing as women's football rightly finds its place in the mainstream now. And as that happens, I think that levels of coverage are going to go up. I'd like to think it's because people are getting used to it being broadcast more, and not a lack of respect. I think that's there are those who do indulge in that are in a minority, and there are a lot of broadcasters out there who do put some big work into supporting women's football. But yeah, I think it's a curve that everyone is learning on, and I think we just have to make sure that we keep uplifting the women's game.
Really well said, Cam. I think that was one thing that Dino and I talked about a lot during the Women's World Cup, is like that tinge of condescension, and Dino mentioned it, you touched on it as well, of like, oh, the girls are out there having fun. Like in America, like after a youth game, people have orange slices and juice boxes after. It's like, we're watching elite athletes. These athletes don't look at themselves like they're out there playing exhibitions. Like they're like the patronization of this sport. I think you're totally right. That's in the rearview mirror now, man. Like this is big money. This is big stakes. And these are the greatest athletes in the world that we're watching. And so I think you're totally right. The people with those like kind of small-minded views, we're just past them now. We'll have to shout them down occasionally, but get them out of here.
That's it. I mean, everyone's seen Aitana Bonmatí play. Tell me that's not an elite player. It's like, it's, and I think like, it does dismay me sometimes when I hear those like lazy tropes be brought out, and it's not. Often it's from fan media, dismissive remarks about women's football. But we do see it from federations too, and you can't ignore the problems that particularly the Spanish Federation have had, because I followed that because of the league and the World Cup, and to win the World Cup in spite of all the things that were going on behind the scenes, it's some achievement. But it wasn't even just Spain. I think a couple of the African nations were having trouble, weren't they? Was it Nigeria, I believe, were having trouble on the way to the World Cup? Zambia as well. So it's sad that we have to talk about things other than football so often with women's football. And that's it. I hope that kind of side of coverage is going to get weeded out now, and we are going to move forward towards just uplifting it as the professional entity that it is. And even the leagues that aren't fully professional, it's like, well, the players are in every sense, in every other sense. The standard, the commitment that they put into it, and I would like to think that is getting realized now. But as broadcasters, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're doing our homework, that this is not a training ground. This is every bit as valid as any other game that you do. That shouldn't have to say that, and whilst commentary is a difficult job, and people have off days, and I had a terrible game a few weeks ago, and it's a great leveler, because we all have those days where you say something, you think, oh, I don't like how that sentence sounded in retrospect. I hope no one took it the wrong way, and that does happen. But yeah, I think consistent use of those stereotypes needs to go, and I think it is starting to go now.
Yeah, and with the game trending in the right direction, I want to bring it back onto the pitch. There's also a huge, influx of young talent that kind of have a hard time wrapping your head around. You look at like a Lily Johannes or a Sinyi Galpse, even Salma Parayuela, you forget how young she still is. Rosa Kafaji, you saw her, up close and saw what she was able to do after, getting her penalty kick saved against Inadozi the week prior, so I think she's still 20 years old. You wonder how a 20-year-old is going to bounce back from that. And then, she's obviously running alongside Yusuba in that Häcken match, who's also early 20s as well. So it also feels like we're going to get a whole new crop of, the next Bonmatís, and just an exciting time for the sport. What have you seen from the young players? I won't ask you a forward-looking question just to, keep it journalistically on the up and up, but what have you seen group stage from this next generation?
I think it's really exciting. I think that the future is in really good hands. Kafaji is an excellent example of it. I think she is 20, isn't she? Off the top of my head, I'm trying to picture my prep notes in my head there, and she's got a fascinating backstory as well. That girl has had to work so hard for everything. I was speaking to my colleague Marcus Berland, who is a Swedish commentator. We spoke before each Häcken game that I did. He gave me like the lowdown on the Swedish news. I would speak to him about the French and Spanish teams, and one thing he said, he translated for me, bless him, it's a really long article from Swedish into English about Rosa Kafaji, and she'd grown up I believe it was in like quite a rundown suburb of Stockholm, and had to talk about the battles of just getting to training. And so many players we've seen have had to work so hard just to get to this level. She had a really horrible injury when she first joined Häcken. I think she broke a leg, and that delayed her their debut. But now she's come into the side. She started to perform, still as a teenager she was, and then to step up for that penalty. Okay, wasn't a great pen. Nadosia with one of the best goalkeeping performances I've seen, and that's another player who's had to fend off adversity. But yeah, to stand up there and then to be the one, and I know it wouldn't have mattered in the end, but I think it's a massive boost for Häcken having done it on their own steam, winning that game against Real Madrid. It was a brilliant moment for her, because over the games that I saw her play, she was outstanding. And not just for her. I think you're right to mention Monica Yusubar. Barcelona have always had a steady conveyor belt of young talent. Salma Pariuelo, I can't believe she was a Real player a couple of years ago, and it just seems she's been at Barcelona forever and is this stalwart of the team. Sure. And I haven't done Ajax yet, but Lily Johannes, 16 years old, it's crazy. And even I'm still getting over the fact that, so I'm 26, and so I think Aitana is the same age as me, and she's the best football player in the world. My skills aren't even good enough for the park around the corner. So it's so much respect for these players. But then the fact that there's players who are a decade younger than me and are at this level, it's crazy. It's crazy. I think there was a team in DAZN. I want to say it was a team from Brittany. It might have been Bordeaux. I think it was Bordeaux. And they had an injury to their main goalkeeper, who I think off the top of my head is Justine Laurent. And they had to put 15-year-old Mighty Mendiburu in net for 3 games. A 15-year-old playing top division football. It's crazy. But then these players could have a 2-decade career ahead of them, and they're getting this experience now at this level. Then it really bodes well for the future. And so I think we've got to be careful not to put too much pressure on these young players, because they are still young players, still growing, a lot of them as well, still finding out who they are. And, we've talked far too much about injuries in the women's game. And sadly, it does just take one injury to derail a career, a promising one. But I think there will be more to come from these players, and the fact that they're gathering this experience, whether we see some of them move to bigger teams, whether we see some stay in leagues like the Swedish one, that remains to be seen. But I'm just full of excitement now for where women's football is going. And we saw the gap closing, didn't we, at the Women's World Cup? We used to see the USA run riot, and it was nice as a semi-neutral to see that field be drawn in. That game against Sweden, I'm sure you guys might not agree, but it was incredible to watch from this side of the pond, because it was a thriller. And I had some work. I used to do some content writing, some editorial work, and they drafted me in to do the women's football. And so I had to write a predictor piece for every game at the World Cup. And in the first round of games, I was predicting some mammoth scorelines like the ones we saw 4 years ago, and they didn't materialise. And I'm so happy with that. So the fact that the standard of young player coming through now is so strong, I think is all part of that.
Absolutely. Obviously, we are surrounded with Team USA fans. I believe Musovic still lives in the nightmares of many of those fans. I realize this is not exactly breaking news. One of the most incredible performances from a goalkeeper I can recall.
Yeah, Zetra Musovic. I haven't covered Chelsea this season either. I've not done the only WSL team in the competition, but she's very highly thought of. And again, that's something that I really don't like from people who don't follow women's football, and they love to throw out outdated montages of goalkeepers from an under 17s match dropping a ball. Like, who's not seen that in men's football? Come on, get real. It's like there are some fabulous, there are some fantastic goalkeepers out there. Jamaica Nadosia was sensational in that game against Häcken. That ultimately they came up short, but that could have kept them in the Champions League. That gave them a fighting chance. And it rather made my game kind of a dull affair when Chelsea were 2-0 up so quickly. I was kind of hoping that I'd be given some help by the fact that the game might be live in terms of importance for a bit. But then, you have to call it as you see it. And as soon as Chelsea raced into the lead, that wasn't the case. But no, it's in good hands at the moment.
It was great to see Häcken. Obviously the only way to guarantee their advancing was to get all 3 points. And even when the game wasn't in doubt, just to see how they defended. Can a team ride that defensive strategy? Can they 1-0 their way to the semifinals or the final? Is that even a thing?
I think it's difficult if you get Barcelona. Stopping them from scoring is difficult. Look at Benfica; they had to score 4, and they still couldn't win it in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody could kind of camp on the edge of their own box and bed in, and I think that can be really entertaining when it happens. You don't need goals to have a good game. I did an excellent 0-0 draw between Slavia and St. Pölten earlier on in the Champions League. It was really thrilling. And yeah, like it could transpire that way. I mean, probably the first major tournament I remember as a fan was men's Euros in 2004. And that Greece team, they didn't play exciting football. They seemed to win every game 1-0. They got themselves to the final and they pulled off one of the greatest shocks in modern football history. So yeah, who's to say they couldn't? And I think it would be very likely that we could see a Barcelona-Lyon final if the draw pans out that way. Still, despite how great these teams have been, and we can't forget the work they've done, even if they do all go out, these unseeded teams in the last 8. But that could be the way it goes. They've shown now that they're all capable of doing something good, of doing something dangerous. So we'll have to just wait and see.
So we've touched across a lot of the elite players in this tournament. And I'm glad to hear you talk about Shimaka Inadozi a couple times, because she's been one of our favorite players of the tournament. She looked like a prize fighter out there last week. She had to get her head wrapped. It was just an unbelievable instinctive performance combined with intelligence. Like, she was just diving over balls, all this stuff. But this is a long way of asking, as the tournament goes so far from the group stage, we're not going to ask you to do a starting 11. But if you were looking at a starting 11, who are the couple players who you're like, well, I cannot leave them out?
So, I mean, the obvious one is to go with the likes of Aitana and Caroline and Graham Hansen. So I'm not going to give you those ones because everybody knows that, okay? They're the best players in the world. Right. Nadozier's in goal. She's been brilliant. Although we've seen some excellent goalkeeping performances as well in other games. I thought Lena Powell's, okay, she led in 4 goals, but I think she played really well. She got man of the match in the game last night. I've had other ones as well where goalkeepers have really stood up well. I think Nadozier is the one that gets it for me. I think you'd put Kafaji in there. Maybe not on penalties, but you put him in midfield. I really liked Anna Anvegård as well, the Häcken winger. Thought that she was impressive. It's difficult to say off the top of your head, but
sure.
Those are the key players who stood up and were counted in key moments. But there were unlikely heroes as well. I still think back to Selina Oldocin, who the centre back for Paris FC, who just found herself 5 yards out from goal and drew the and drew the foul for Gaëtan Tiné's penalty. And she's another legend that you have to put in, Gaëtan Tiné, just for the experience. But there have been moments for so many different players across the tournament that had so many standout figures. I think Lucia Alves, from what I saw from her last night, would also go in there for me. She's really tricky down the wing. She's been a regular for Benfica and for Portugal as well. She's a real handy player. And maybe Jessica Silva, the way that she's been. I think there's a lot to be said about that Benfica team. And so that's a bit of a vague answer. But over the players I've seen, I think there's a few candidates for that 11.
Love that you mentioned Selina Hossein. She is an ITC favorite. More of a slight build for a center back, but she is out there. We joke she's out there running 100 miles per hour, which I think is roughly 161 kilometers per hour. And she's just out there as a bulldozer. She's fantastic to watch.
She seems to fear nobody. And I think we've moved away in recent years from the archetypal centre half who I think when I was playing. Yeah. When I was a junior, I was always tall, so they put me at centre back because they thought, oh, that's where the big lads go. I couldn't have the ball to save my life. That didn't stop it, So it doesn't. You don't necessarily need to be 6'5" and a huge with quarterback size to kind of play centre back role. You have to be a good footballer, and Selina Oldocin is. And so I think as well, the level of football we've seen in this tournament has been better as well. Just you can see the improvement. I did the tournament as well last year. That was my first running of it. But I think across the board, just the standard is so much higher already in 12 months.
I mean, we saw big improvements. Oldocin is a perfect one just within this tournament. Now she finds herself like more up the field. And I think defensively, it seems to be more about the instincts now than the body type or, like the physical tools. It's really just like kind of like the positioning that makes such a huge difference.
I think you can learn as well, because let's talk about Ingrid Engen, who has had to fill in. I've almost forgot that she was a centre midfielder because I've seen her so many times at centre back. And Barcelona, I do feel for them because, okay, Irene Paredes was ill coming into the game. Mapi Leon has had surgery. Who else is missing? Gianna Fernandez. So it's quite an injured list to have. And the fact that they've had to throw in Marta Torrejon, who's been splitting her time with right back, and then Ingrid Engen, who made a brilliant stop in the Supercopa final. It was 0-0. Catacoy lost the ball. I think it was Meira Ramirez who had the shot, and then Engen saved Barcelona on the line. Could have been a different game. So it's more about just being a good technical footballer, and that's true of the men's game as well. It doesn't. You don't necessarily need to be throwing yourself headlong into a challenge. And I've got full respect for players who can play out of position and play in different areas of the field, because Jonathan Heraldes was saying, he said, I've got a few players in positions they're not used to playing, but we're coming into the most important part of the season now for Barcelona, and I need my players to be flexible, and I need everyone to be ready to do their bit for the team.
I had a follow-up question about the teams and kind of how they match up. We like to kind of go cross-sport a little bit with some comparisons, throw some American football in there, throw some boxing in there. I have a little bit of a boxing background. And one of the old adages is, this idea that styles make fights. And, you obviously were able to see Madrid kind of up close, either in the group stage or through Liga F. And it feels like a Madrid, like Häcken just had their number. I also think about PSG and Roma, like PSG coming off their first 2 group stage matches, no points, no goals. And then they get 2 wins against Roma, who was kind of on a tear at that point. And it just seems like some of the matchups are just bad matchups.
It's funny, we say that in tennis as well. So I do the Women's Tennis Tour commentary, and you can pay attention to rankings a little bit if you want, but it's more about how the styles match up. And some players just have really difficult days against certain opponents. And I think that was true of Real Madrid and Häcken in the first game. In the second game, I think that Real Madrid, they just looked deflated. They looked beaten by that point. Confidences are low. And we've got to remember that they lost Caroline Weir, and you can't legislate for that so early in the season. She was probably the best player in the division the season before. Certainly in attacking midfield, nobody came close, and missing her goals and her influence is difficult. But they have had time. They have had time to develop, to get used to her absence, and they just haven't got accustomed to it. And Häcken always looked the more likely to threaten them, and even when they went behind in the first game, they always had that. It's not all about belief. I'm reticent to just talk about believing and wanting it more, because it is a tactical battle. But Macklin had them set up in a way that they could penetrate Real Madrid, and kept them guessing. And so I think that link up they've got between Kafaji and Ambagord, Yusubar, and Larishi as well, because she was injured coming into the Champions League, wasn't she? And she is a talent. I think that front line, if they can keep them going into the quarterfinals, they could catch in a couple more teams out, because again, no one will. I don't think there is an easy draw to have now. I don't think gone are the days of having an easy draw. And not to say that we won't see any high score lines, but there's a few banana skins in there, as we say over here.
Love it. Kim, I'd be interested to know, is there a moment of the group stage that sticks with you, that you're just like, man, that was a time? You mentioned the end of the Barcelona Benfica halves. Anything else that you kind of like, this time next year you're going to be like, oh, remember last year when XYZ
I know
happened?
Straight away what moment it was, and it was the end of Matchday 4 when Paris FC beat Real Madrid with that Gaetantine penalty. And just the shock, the resignation on the faces of the Real Madrid players. I think it was because I believe it was Terry Abellera who gave away the penalty. I think it was, and I remember the image that stays in my mind, because when the full-time whistle goes, we've got about a minute to wrap up. And you want to make sure you're capturing what's on screen, because radio, in that sense, is easier because you can paint it the way that you see fit. But you have to match it up in TV, obviously, with what the viewer is seeing. Because I could be talking about Terry Abellera, and it could be picturing Gaetantine. But there was just this shot of Claudia Sornosa, who just looked aghast. There were 2 headlines: a brilliant resurrection from Paris, but Real Madrid eliminated with 2 games to go. It was scarcely believable. And just seeing the reaction from Alberto Toril, knowing that he was beaten, it helped the fact that there was a late goal in the game, because it was an exciting game and low-scoring affair as well. But that was the moment I thought, wow, I've witnessed something special. It shocked me in the sense that you try not to predict what's going to happen, but you know what you expect. And I think seeing Real Madrid flop out like that, because something that I couldn't believe. I prepped this stat for my Real Madrid match this week against Häcken, and they've only beaten 3 teams in the group stage. I think it's Vlasnia from last season. I did one of those games, and then the season before it was Breithablik and Zhitlobud, I think it was, from Ukraine. And so the fact that they've again failed to get a single win, it's staggering. It's staggering. And so that for me was this kind of crowning moment that's up there with those last mad few minutes from Barcelona, because in the context of the Champions League that won't be quite as important, even though it was a crazy period. Seeing Real Madrid drop out the way they did, that I'll remember that.
Excellent. I think it would be, again, Dino being in Orlando, Florida, me being in Seattle, Washington. I don't want to throw you totally on the spot here. It was announced this morning over here. Asisat Oshuala transfer to Bay FC in the NWSL. That's our team out here in San Francisco. $162,000 transfer fee. I'm just kind of curious, over there, what kind of eye do you guys have on the NWSL?
See, that's really interesting, because I got the news for the Barcelona team news, and I get it normally at the same time as fans do. Sometimes a little later. Sometimes I'm on Twitter looking at it like you guys are. And I saw UEFA reporting that Aziza Oshuala hadn't travelled, and we'd already seen. Okay, we know that her deal is up, and we'd heard the rumours about her going to the States, because whenever a big player leaves their club now, you think the States is where they're going to be heading. So I'm not at all surprised. I've actually learnt that from you guys now, because I've been in the garage with my car getting it sorted today, so I haven't seen that news. But I'm happy for her, because she was brilliant. She was brilliant last season for Barcelona. But the problem is, and it's not a problem for Barcelona, that Carolina Graham-Hansen, they've got such an embarrassment of riches. So good. I mean, so good. She is like living her best footballing life, and another player who's had to battle. But it's hard because there just isn't room for all of those elite forwards, and so I'm not as clued up on the NWSL as I would like to think I am on the European leagues. But you can't ignore that it's growing, and there is an interest. There is an interest now that more figures from Europe are starting to go over to the NWSL. I think it is hard with the time difference for UK fans as well to watch those games, but DAZN have them, and I don't commentate on those because they're done on the World Feed. I'd love to get involved, but there is a growing interest, definitely, and you see whenever any managerial appointment is talked about, the several big candidates over this side of the globe, and so what about for you guys as well? How is the interest this is out of my interest, the WSL? How widely is it watched in the States?
I think it's still tough to find. So I believe Paramount Plus, they broadcast one WSL match per weekend. It's either 1 or 2 matches per weekend, so they can be a little tricky to find. You can find some stuff on YouTube. I think it's growing, though. I think just like the women's game in general, obviously you have a powerhouse of USWNT over here, but I think people have really opened their eyes to, and you touched on it earlier, especially with this past World Cup, is fans have realized, especially for the NWSL, if they want any chance at keeping up with those European leagues, they got to start shelling out the money and getting players like Oshuala over here. And so it was encouraging to see, despite ever since the rumors started floating around there. I've been hoping Oshuala would come to Seattle, but I'll kind of set my fan hat aside there. She's going a little farther south to San Francisco, but that's pretty encouraging for us. But I think because the Premier League is so prevalent over here, now people are like, well, let me check out Arsenal women. Let me check out Manchester City women. And they're like, oh, Bunny Shaw, she's incredible. And like you can kind of see it start to really spiderweb out.
Yeah, I love the global nature of the game. In fact, I saw DAZN, I think it was, shared a video of was it like West Virginia Mountaineers, or it was some college women's soccer team watching the Barcelona game last week against Eintracht Frankfurt, and then hearing my own voice as well was really surreal. Like in the background, these girls were having a lunch break, and we talk about the halftime oranges. I think they were actually having their post-match refuel or something, just watching this game because it is middle of the day for you guys. And I was like, that's mad that there's so much interest in this match all around the world, and it's interesting that you say that the NWSL has to catch up with the European leagues, because I'd love to see some sort of tournament, and I say this with a caveat. We've seen far too many injuries, especially in the women's game. Player overload is a massive concern. We've got to be careful about throwing too many games into an already congested schedule. But if that can be managed, it will be interesting to see how teams from either side of the Atlantic do match up, and Australian teams as well, because we haven't talked about Australia. That's such a hotbed of talent. I thought that Hayley Raso was going to get her first Champions League goal. Didn't transpire, but they've given us so much in terms of footballing talent, and it leaves it in a very good place at the moment.
100%. Yeah, I think that's a great point. It really is the confluence of the Premier League. The last 10 years in the US have seen like incredible growth around that plus the World Cup. It's sort of coming from different angles and different directions. And yeah, I think it's really an economics question. We've talked about it quite a bit on the pod, because like the NWSL is modeled after most American sports leagues, not after most world football leagues. So it is a little different, a little tricky, and we'll see kind of how that shakes out. But that would be incredible to see some of these the best teams across the leagues. Really, just let's get a couple of the top NWSL teams into the Champions League somehow.
Wild card,
but I don't know. That's really what we want to see. Yeah, wild cards. There we go. And just to clarify, Cam's not out here advocating for more games, because we want to keep things, we want to solve that injury problem first and foremost, but would be something to see for sure. So Group C, referred to on the Into the Channel pod as the Group of Life, then since renamed the Group of Death the last 5 minutes of Matchday 6. PSG starts off super slow. I think no wins, no goals in the first two. Then they kind of find their footing against Roma. They sort of teeter between looking like really super dangerous, like maybe could make a run to the final, or in the match against Bayern, not sure how much of it you caught, but Bayern really kind of gave them trouble and was sort of a little bit of a step ahead. PSG sort of needed a couple moments of brilliance, one from Baltimore, one from Chwenga, to just kind of stay even and actually just survive. But PSG, you mentioned them as maybe the weakest of those top tier teams, but what do you see as what's possible for a team like that?
Yeah, maybe the weakest of those four, but certainly not weak. I mean, they're doing a good job of kind of holding onto the coattails of Lyon in Dayon Arkema.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Lyon are going to take top spot, but Dayon Arkema is going to be really interesting this year because of the new playoff format. So at the end of the regular season, you just have to be in that top four. It is going to come down to 90 minutes of football, and okay, there are some critics of that idea, Sonia Bonpastor and the ex-PSG boss Gerard Precheur being two of them, but it does make it interesting, and that is a word I'd also use to describe Paris Saint-Germain. They've scored a lot of goals in the league and they don't concede very many, and so I was quite alarmed to see how they were struggling after two games. Picked it up with those 3 wins, and I didn't actually get to watch any of Matchday 6 in Group C, which is a real shame. I think I was driving home from my match. But yeah, it just seemed crazy. It seemed crazy. That's the sort of thing that only group stage football can give you. And the fact that any one of those teams could have gone through was that's what you want as a neutral on the final day. And I actually did their quarterfinal second leg last season against Wolfsburg. I'm doing all this from memory, so if I get any details wrong, I apologise. But they're the team I've covered the least out of the big French teams so far this season. But Chwenga, what a talent! She is scarily good, and I like the work of Baltimore in the engine room as well, and even players who can come off the bench and change the game, like Amelie Vangsgaard. Really strong, and they were undone. I remember a beautiful chip by Alex Pop for Wolfsburg last season in the quarterfinal, but it could have been very different. That was a really tight game. I think they lost Elisa de Almeida in the first leg. I think, did she handball and get a red card? I think she might have been out for the game I did, and so that was on a knife edge, that one. And so they could be stronger this year. I'm really interested to see what matchup they get. Because they can struggle, they can struggle. They have let that gap open up at the start of the season, and then they've started to pull it back. And we saw how sluggish they were getting off the mark in the Champions League. But no, you look at that front line, and Chewinga can cause a problem for any defence. Even Häcken, if they're defending right on the edge of their own box, or Benfica. So they'll be interesting to keep an eye on.
Well, Kim, we're going to get you out of here on time. Very much appreciate the time, man. And obviously you're crushed it on the pod. So big thanks from us for hanging out with us.
Well, thank you very much, guys. It was really nice of you to get in touch, and thank you for your kind words as well. We're, as commentators, we're not the main characters, and it's important that we stress that. We are there in the background, but it is really nice to have your work acknowledged by people, and so thank you for that, and thank you for all the work that you do as well. And keep in touch. I'm sure we'll speak again. I'll be tuning in, and let's see what else happens in the Champions League, because I don't think we're out of stories yet. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, Cam. Thanks for the time.